What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Crypto Airborne in the house, dropping you guys the latest and greatest cryptocurrency news and updates. Today is, what is today? February 23rd, 2022. And I'm back. I've, haven't been around the last couple of days. I had my mom and sister in town, so I took a good 5-day break from social media. Only popped in here or there just to check in on like Discord, Twitter, and I jumped on a live stream with 6FEB randomly the other night, and my sister popped in there. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, haven't been on much lately. So back at it though. I just put out a good 25-minute video about Elrond price predictions, kind of a summary. If you guys are interested in that, check it out. But yeah, we're back for another episode of the VGX Heroes Twitter Spaces AMA, held from our VGX Heroes education panel. Should be some good stuff going on today. Going to be talking about kind of the rise and fall of empires, and then also, just precious metals and different types of monies and monetary things that they used back in the day and still today type of thing. So it should be pretty interesting. But before we begin, I'm going to do a quick market overview before we begin the Twitter space here in about 3 minutes, just to kind of get a sense where we're at. But yeah, like I said, market's not doing too hot. I think, let me just refresh it. We are up only about 0.19% last 24 hours. Bitcoin's at about 36,819, down about 3.51%. ETH's down 2.65%, sitting at about $2,566. Cardano's down about 2.91%. Gainers, though, we'd have some gainers. Dia up 27%, New up 13%, Keep Network up about 8%, and a bunch of others up about 4 to 5%, but nothing too much. Losers last 24 hours. Wow. Ample fourth governance token down about 17%. Circuits of value 14%. Pretty much the whole market was pretty much down. What is today? Today's February 23rd. It's International Dog Biscuit Appreciation Day, Banana Bread Day, Dog Biscuit Day, Hospitality Workers Appreciation Day, Inconvenience Yourself Day, National Day Brunei. I don't know what that is. Tile Day, Pink Shirt Day in Canada. Play Tennis Day, and last, the Emperor's Birthday in Japan. So it's your holidays for January 23rd or February 23rd. Crypto bubbles, see a red. Only a couple up. SFM, Waves, and Luna. It's pretty good. Luna kind of does its own thing every now and then. Favorites. What do we got? Like I said, everything's down. My biggest looks like Quant, but Luna's up 4.2% on the day. Sitting at $57.85. So that's pretty good to see that's up. Got 1 minute. Let's see. Total crypto caps, coming down a little bit. We're still on this trend line right here, 1.6 trillion. We're at 1.64 trillion here on TradingView. CoinGecko is always a little bit higher, saying we're at about 1.7 trillion. Bitcoin dominance, trading sideways. Total about a 42.34%. Crypto fear and greed. Still in extreme fear. Yesterday we were 25. We're down about 2 points today. We're sitting at 23. Last week we were neutral. Last month, extreme fear 12. So like I said, man, we've been in this downtrend for a while. We shot up a little bit, around, 7th of February up until about the 17th of February. And now we're on a small downtrend. There's lots of things going on in the world. The Ukraine FUD going on. You got the Fed meetings and everything going on. Who knows what's going to happen. So like I said, guys, go check out my Elrond video. I just put out 25 minutes long. Elrond's undervalued. To tell you a lot about it. So go check that out if you missed it. Looks like I'm trying to rush right now. We're at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Let me refresh this. Like I said, should be talking about it's kind of monetary metals, gold, silver, copper, and then we're going to get into different types of empires, ancient civilizations, China, Egypt, India, and jumping over the Roman Age, Eastern Roman Empire, Renaissance, Dark Ages, and a lot of history about money and precious metals and the rise and fall of civilizations based on this type of stuff. So let's jump right in. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Smash that thumbs up on your way in, and feel free to leave some comments as we're going. Feel free to leave some comments.
Hello. Airborne. Aragorn, what's up, Duke? What's up? What's up? McLovin, I think that's you.
And for some reason, it's always quiet, so I'm going to throw on Edge like I did last week. It was a lot louder.
As of it was either yesterday or the day before.
It's amazing.
Bear with us one moment, folks. Getting everybody up here on the panel. Got some good stuff for you coming. Bear with us one moment, folks.
What's going on, everybody? Good to see everybody. Glad to be back. Sorry I missed last week, but real world job, I guess it's in the way of things. But glad to be back. If you don't mind, could you hit the bottom right tweet button, share this, get some new people in, or let everybody know we're live and getting some new people in here. And we're looking forward to it. We got a good space, a lot planned for it, so can't wait to get into it.
Are we missing anybody? Oh, there's Odie. Okay.
Hey, can you guys hear me? You cut out for a little bit.
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Yeah, I can hear you as well. Just give it a couple more minutes. Let everybody find their way in.
All right, we can go ahead and get it kicked off. Start doing some introductions, give people a chance to kind of pop in. But yeah, this is the VGX Heroes Weekly Educational Space. This is an idea from one of our heroes, or early heroes that passed away. It's just based on providing good information to beginners, intermediate, and more advanced people in crypto. Help open the doors and make it easier for people to make informed decisions on their own without basing all their opinions on what they see on social media. And we're kind of topic based, but we're always open to feedback and the community coming up. So feel free if you have any questions or anything to request, and we'll get you up. But I'm Pepe Stallone. You all know me, been here a while, 10th VGX hero. Glad to be back this week, and we can kind of pass it over to Derek to start off.
Hey everyone, I'm Derek Smith. I organize the Old City Bitcoiners meetup group over in St. Augustine in North Florida, and we meet in Jacksonville Beach as well. I'm looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Appreciate you as always being here and sacrificing your time for us, and appreciate your input. So looking forward to it. What's going on, Frankie?
Hey Pepe, well, welcome back. Frankie here. Go by VGX Heroes, Jack Nicholson, and I'll come at you with current events tonight.
Love to hear it. Can't wait. What's going on, Aldo?
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Aldo the Apache from the VGX Heroes, and tonight I'll be covering foreign affairs.
Looking forward to it. It's a great conversation for everything going on. So definitely looking for some more insight on that. Hey, Floki, my friend, what's going on?
What's going on, Pepe? Good to have you back this week, man. Y'all know me. I am the Crypto Viking, the VGX Heroes boat builder, founded with Aragorn and Maximus. And today, I'm not just a hype man. I'm going to cover the Dark Ages and a bit of the Renaissance. So I'm excited to tell you guys a story.
Looking forward to it. It couldn't be a more fitting person. Obi-Wan, what's going on, my friend?
Hey, is tonight the night we cover Imperial credits and calamari flan? No, bad Star Wars reference? Okay. some of you got it. Maybe next week. So I'm Obi-Wan. I'm the Jedi Master, bringing balance to the FUD Force and education to all the young Padawans out there. Thanks for listening to me and my bad dad jokes, and I'll give the mic up to the next person.
Hey, you got some laughs. They may not have been outspoken about it, but there are some in there. What's going on, Sunday?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sun Tzu. I do a lot of the social media managing for VGX Heroes. We've got our Discord, Twitter here, as you can tell, Facebook, and Instagram. So if you guys like what you hear in this space, feel free to go ahead and check any of those out. Or if you see any VGX Heroes out in the wilds, go ahead and ask them how you can join up if you'd like to do that as well. Excited to hear all the smart people tell me smart things tonight.
Absolutely. And speaking of smart people, you can go ahead, Michael.
Well, it should be a fun one because we pretty much get to turn this space into a 2-hour Robert Devane commercial about gold and precious metals. So this is the boomerest of all boomer spaces I think that we've done. But I think this is a good way to bridge the gap between what we covered last week in primitive metal or primitive monies and where we're heading to the death spiral of fiat currency post 1930s, and then especially after 1971. So next week, definitely make some popcorn. We'll toss the floor over to Obi-Wan and let him completely eviscerate fiat currency. But tonight we cover we connect the dots between wampum and seashells and Yap Island rice tones and how we got to this bullshit paper money with dead presidents on it that we have today.
Looking forward to it. And with that, we pass it over to Frankie to start us off with current events.
Hey, Frankie, before you get started, I'd like to ask everyone to take that little blue button on the bottom right corner, press it, and tweet out the space to let everyone know it's going down right now. Frankie, go ahead.
Thank you, guys. Well, let's start off. 2 days after Canadian lawmakers voted to extend emergency powers, allowing police to quell potential unrest, the Prime Minister was set to revoke the emergency powers now that the Ottawa protests are over. But he thinks this may have been more to do with a run on the bank worry. But regardless, let this be a lesson. One should always hold at least a portion of their crypto off exchange, because whatever you think about with regards to trucker protests or who's in power now, the other shoe will always fall. In other news, Senator Kathy Loomis and a former Fed vice chair recently discussed whether the U.S. central bank should hold Bitcoin on its balance sheet, stating that once there's a statutory and regulatory framework, it'd make a lot of sense. The fact that it's completely decentralized is going to make it over time more unambiguous. I think it's going to be something that the Fed should hold on its balance sheet. And then everyone's favorite topic, or at least mine, on the inflation front. There's more gaslighting from the mainstream media, this time from CBS in a late Tuesday tweet. The network asserted that the U.S. economy has been hit with increased gas prices, inflation, and supply chain issues due to the Ukraine crisis. So I guess all those expensive things like groceries and gas for the last 2 years have been attributed to what's happening today or yesterday or what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know. Luckily, they got ratioed pretty quickly before Twitter could censor it. And staying on the topic of inflation, here's a sobering stat for you guys. From February 2020 to the end of 2021, broad money supply, M2, increased by 6.5 trillion, or over 40%. That increase over less than 2 years is roughly equivalent to the rise over the previous 10 years. Yet policymakers who have long argued that inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon called the surge in inflation transitory, owing to supply bottlenecks. Well, I don't know about that. So here's another sobering stat. The Monetary and Financial Flow Index, the MFF, has been a measurement used to observe excess liquidity in the economy for decades. It signaled excess liquidity growth, well above, for example, well above GDP, before the dot-com and housing bubbles, where the primary source was explosive private sector credit growth and robust gains in liquid assets. But over the last year, growth in the MMF index has been more than twice that of both those crashes. So, I don't know. Brace yourselves after what happened in the market, in the equity market today. Finally, all the buzz has been around Russia and Ukraine. When will they invade? Will they invade? Did they already invade? And with that, we'll pass it over to my main man, Aldo, that we'll talk about this.
Hey, thanks, Frankie. Yeah, tonight I'm going to discuss the Russian-Ukraine conflict. I'm going to discuss the current situation, the immediate effect on traditional and cryptocurrency markets, foreign policy and geopolitical ramifications, and then I'm going to give a little historical context. So on February 21st, Vladimir Putin recognized two regions in eastern Ukraine as independent republics. Those are the republics of Donetsk and Luhansk. And on February 22nd, Russian military forces entered these two regions ostensibly for peacekeeping operations. This comes amid rising tensions between Russia and Western powers. So that's currently the situation and state of affairs right now. Now, the immediate effect that that's had on the traditional markets has been bad. Everyone knows that and can see that. Oil prices have surged to nearly $100. Brent crude futures rose 4% to $97. That's the highest since September of 2014. S&P 500 futures fell 2%, and NASDAQ futures fell 2.7%. Additionally, energy in Germany has risen 9.8% to almost 80 euros per megawatt hour in Germany, and that's directly tied to the Nord Stream 2 sanctions that we'll discuss in a minute. Regarding the crypto market, Bitcoin has slipped 15.5% since the incursion. Ethereum's been down, has dropped 17.2%, and DOT is down 19.7% on the 7-day. The foreign policy and geopolitical ramifications are essentially sanctions. The U.S. and Europe have imposed a series of sanctions on Russia. Namely, the U.S. has placed sanctions on two Russian banks, and then also they've nullified or basically blocked their ability to raise money. Basically, they place sanctions on the country's sovereign debt, which means it can no longer raise money from the West and trade new debt on the U.S. or European markets. And the U.S. also will impose sanctions on Russian elites and their family members. So from a foreign policy perspective, that's what's happening. Additionally, the U.S. and Germany have imposed sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 oil pipeline, which is significant because this is a natural gas pipeline that is supplying Germany with natural gas. Germany is not a proponent of nuclear power, so they get the majority of their power through natural gas. And this pipeline was supposed to double the flow of natural gas to Germany. So through imposing this sanction and Germany refusing to certify the pipeline, we could see it's going to have negative effects on Germany as well in terms of their energy prices going up. So that's something to be aware of as well. And then finally, historical context. Essentially, the Ukraine-Russian conflict is very nuanced, and it has a long history. It goes back to 988 AD, where the first Slavic state was founded in Kiev. And throughout time and throughout history, Ukraine has been conquered by many different nations, and so it literally is like a crossroads between the East and the West. And so what you see in Ukraine is the Western regions tend to ally themselves or align more with Europe, while the Eastern regions align themselves more with Russia. And you can see this with religion. The West is Catholic, the East is Orthodox. There's a lot of ethnic Russians that live in the East. So it's not just cut and dry. Now, one positive thing that I would like to add is that Ukraine did recently legalize crypto and cryptocurrency markets. And we've seen a lot of money inflowing into Ukraine to support the people there. So again, it's another demonstration, just like Canada, of why cryptocurrency is so valuable in times of unrest. So that's just something to think about. Financial outlook. There's two scenarios. I found some data published by Goldman Sachs. Essentially, Goldman Sachs sees if there's they believe if there's outright conflict, it could result in a 6% or overall 6% lower from Friday's close, with worse losses in Europe and Japan. The analysts believe that if there's a 10% drop in the ruble, this would push oil up 13% and cause a 27 basis point decline in benchmark treasury yields. And conversely, the de-escalation scenario would see the ruble strengthen and U.S. stocks rise about 6% and treasury yields jump. So those are two different financial outcomes depending on what takes place in Ukraine. So that is your foreign policy update, or foreign affairs update.
Great stuff. Anybody have anything they want to add to it, or any questions or anything they want to add?
No, I thought that was awesome. It was super thorough. Thanks. If I can voice one concern, Frank said that the story we all can't get enough of, and then didn't follow up with anything about RazzleCon. So I would like to voice a complaint there. But otherwise, everything's been excellent, guys. Good work.
Aldo, I did have one question with regards to this. How much of it do you think, and I don't know if you can answer this, but how much do you think is due to the shift to being the U.S. being a net importer now of oil? It seems like it's given Russia kind of an upper hand in that respect. From kind of different things that I've read, and over the years, I know we've kind of increased. We've gone from net importer since probably 2012, 2013 to net exporter in the last 4 years, and then we kind of turned the tide the last 2 years. I didn't know if that had anything to do with it, or if that's a result of what's going on.
Do you mean this that shift having to do with Russia's decision to take the action that it's taken? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, yes. It seems like that that they find that now that all these countries have kind of gone to this ESG type movement, and they've cut off strategic oil supplies, that this gave like a path for Putin to have the upper hand. It seems, in my own kind of opinion, but I don't know if you talk on that, or if that's just
no. I mean, energy and resources is always a source for these global conflicts. But personally, I think this has more to do with the longstanding Russian fear of NATO encroaching on its Western front. I mean, this goes back to the 90s when the U.S., in like 91, when, the USSR fell, and essentially the U.S. promised that we would not extend past East Germany, and since then, NATO has inducted 7 different member countries, moving closer and closer to Russia. And historically, Russia's only been invaded, obviously, from the West, whether that was Germany or the French. So they're incredibly sensitive about this issue. And I believe in 2014, NATO and the US attempted to put long range missiles in Poland, which didn't go over too well at all. So I think that there are larger geopolitical games afoot and pressures. And I mean, ultimately, what I think is going to happen, what I think is Putin's strategy, this is just a personal opinion. Per the NATO treaty, well, first of all, NATO has been pushing, and the West has been pushing to get Ukraine in the EU and then into NATO. So once they get them in the EU, then they can get them into. They want to get them into NATO. Ultimately, that's the game. And but per the treaty, if the state, the nation for consideration must be in a stable state. Okay, if they're in an unstable state, like now, they cannot be considered for admission into NATO. So what I personally think Putin is doing is creating enough of a ruckus there to nullify the possibility of them, per the treaty itself, to be admitted in, because ultimately we come back to that core sensitivity and concern that Russia has, which is they don't want people on their border, a strategic threat, which is how he views NATO, on his doorstep. So I think that personally, I think that's what's going on. And I also think there's a lot of other ancillary factors as well. I mean, you have the oil control. I mean, and the U.S. too also has concerns, right? Because the U.S. is concerned that with the energy that they're going to be providing, or that Russia's going to be providing to Germany, they will basically have more influence on Germany, which is a leading EU Western nation, and they'll be able to encroach in that sphere of influence more. So that's why this is such a critical matter. So it's multifaceted and more than just what meets the eye. So that would be my answer. Did I answer your question, Frankie?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was just, it's a very interesting topic to me, and it's like you mentioned, it's multifaceted, and I like to get any information from wherever I can find it on this topic, because I just find this kind of stuff pretty cool.
Aldo, I had a quick question, not to put you on the spot, but the one thing that did jump out at me this week was Putin admitting for the first time publicly ever that he had approached Bill Clinton during his presidency about actually entering NATO, and that to me was, I hadn't seen that actually confirmed anywhere. Have you seen that confirmed by anybody on our side that would at least give us confidence that it's not just propaganda?
I have not seen anything, and I've never heard of it. It seems kind of counterintuitive, since NATO was literally created to counter the USSR, and many think, at least in Russia, that NATO should have been dissolved, after the fall and the collapse of the Soviet Union, since that was the entire purpose for its inception. So that would, I don't know what purpose that would serve. I mean, historically, Russia has always, I don't know, kept its distance from Europe. Essentially, they've been kind of isolated. So, yeah, I'd have to look into that. That's the short answer.
Fascinating stuff. Yeah, it's not an area I'm super strong in, so I love learning as much as I can about it. But if nothing else on that, we can kind of segue it over to Michael and Derek.
Sure. So before we do, I see Jimmy down there requesting. Let me see if I can get him up in case he's trying to comment on this topic. Jimmy, I've been trying to give you the mic, but are you there? Can you hear me? Looks like we got Obi-Wan kind of add as well.
Gotta love Twitter Spaces.
All right, Jimmy, if you can hear and you are trying to comment, just sit tight. We'll try to get you on stage eventually. And just in case you're trying to request from a PC or something like that, just know that you have to do this on a mobile app in order to actually speak. So we'll come back to you and give you some time if you're looking for it. But all right, so diving right into a little bit more of our education series. Last week we covered primitive monies, right? So we did the rye stones on Yap Island and seashells and agri-beads, all super fascinating. To me, probably the most interesting period of monetary history, just to conceptualize the creation of money from nothing. Because everything else, like money has come to be from already understanding that money exists. But the fact that those different primitive systems kind of coalesce naturally from nothing, before the concept of money being a thing, to me is just a fascinating period of time. But ultimately, those all were supplanted, and every primitive form of money ultimately died at the point that monetary metals became accessible and producible. And between metallurgy and technology, they became pretty much the preferred go-to. So quickly, just, why would we get away from the primitive systems that we discussed last week? Well, we talked about, for one thing, they weren't consistent. They weren't uniform and unique. So if you had seashells and you had to vary the value depending on the rarity and the intricacy, and there is this, valuation and gradation scale to every single piece of your quote unquote money, it's an incredibly inefficient process. It's also difficult to forecast value into the future. So you got a bit more stability and consistency once you went to using monetary metals as your monetary media. So because of, like we had discussed, last week, no money has ever just been created out of thin air and deemed money, right? It always had to have some sort of desirable trait already. And that's what took it from a market demand to a monetary demand. And in the case of monetary metals, there were a handful of metals that were predisposed to become monies more so than others. So a few of the ones that we'll cover before we get into the historical examples and just give a 30,000-foot overview of why monetary metals work and how monetary metals work, and some of the variety between the different flavors out there. Just covering it at a basic level, your rarer metals like silver and gold were pretty durable. So they were less likely to corrode or ruin. Those were good ones to bring your value forward across time, because you didn't have to worry about rust or corrosion or things like that. Gold is pretty much indestructible. It's never been able to be recreated unless you believe some alchemists out there. But gold in that particular sense is unique. But regardless of the metal, whether it be gold, silver, bronze, copper, the uniformity of being able to actually machine it and manufacture coins, or initially nuggets, initially the monetary metals were used in small pieces that had to be weighed each time. But ultimately, technology and metallurgy allowed the stamping and manufacture of standard size units, so that each transaction didn't require weighing the amount that you were given. You weren't tossing a bag of coins or nuggets to a merchant or a tradesman, and then them having to weigh it to determine the value that you're paying them. But these are all different kind of things that put monetary metals at the forefront of monetary solutions, and ultimately, like we said, just kind of eliminated the primitive ways of the past. So to give people some context, monetary metals have been used for 2,500 years. So we talked about, some of those systems that we discussed last week maybe lasting a couple hundred years, 500 years, but monetary metals have been around since the Greek king, Croesus, who minted gold coins, and we were still using gold coins as monetary media up through the early 20th century. I mean, you can still buy gold coins that have been minted in, let's call it, quote unquote, recent history. So we had, like I said, the different metals each kind of served their different purposes over time. You had gold coins, which were saleable across time, like I said. They were also super saleable across space because they carried a lot of value in a small space. You know, you didn't need a lot of gold to transport a lot of value. Whereas then you got into kind of the, you know, not to play off the Olympics, but you go gold, silver, bronze. You know, silver coins, less good than gold, better than bronze. You know, they were most saleable across scales because they were more easily divisible. They didn't weigh as much per unit, so you didn't start to really split hairs with tiny little increments of gold. And then the bottom of the podium being bronze were useful for the least valuable transactions. And that's kind of still indicative in at least the aesthetic appearance of like our pennies today. So as with everything throughout history, you come up with a good system and you'll find people that try to game that system and find ways to cheat. So one of the vulnerabilities that we had in history with monetary metals was that governments and counterfeiters could and often would reduce the amount of the precious metal in each coin. So like I was saying, when we went from non-standardized nuggets to stamped coins that had a fixed weight and a fixed amount of that precious metal in them. We'll get into some specific examples a little bit later in some of the historical pieces, but you could get into coin clipping or, you know, degrading the purity of the monetary metal, and that poses an issue as well. Like we said, as we get more into the later history and up until the point where we'll start things off next week, you then had paper money and checks that were backed by gold that enabled you to use the store of value of gold and have gold-backed transactions, but eliminate the scale problem that caused people to use silver and bronze to begin with. So that also then impacted, you know, silver's history in the monetary use case. But I'll leave this for Obi, but obviously centralizing all of the gold in the banks and central banks of the world created problems later on down the road because it made it possible for the banks and governments to start to dilute the supply or increase the supply of money past the amount of gold that they had. And a little foreshadowing, that story doesn't end well. So we've kind of covered a bit about why gold has risen to the forefront. You know, you can't create more. Digging in a little bit more anecdotally, why would you use gold over like copper or any other metal? You know, was it arbitrarily chosen? Well, if you look at the monetary use case for copper, it would be a completely different story. And this all ties back into what we discussed last week with regards to stock to flow. So if you look at, you know, copper, zinc, nickel, brass, anything else that is a metal that is primarily consumed, you know, it has a use case in manufacturing, electronics, you know, different types of products that it gets used in, but it's not stockpiled like a reserve asset. The amount in the stockpile is not nearly as much compared to the amount that could be produced. So that in terms of stock to flow, you look at gold, for example, gold, the current stockpile is typically about 60 times the amount of gold that could ever be mined or created in any one year. Not created, but found, you know, available for consumption. That everything else pales in comparison. You get into silver, you know, silver is sub 10 times. Copper, the stockpile of copper is about 1 year's worth of copper. So if, just to kind of elucidate this in the extreme case, if you were to try to make the case that copper should be money, then what would happen? So does copper have value? Absolutely. Much in the same way that oil has value. But do you see anybody storing their value in oil? No, because it's a consumable. So if you had the attempt to store value in copper and you only have the stockpile of 1 year's worth of copper, what initially happens is you incentivize everybody that can produce copper to produce more copper. Right now, they're controlling the ultimate stockpile by doing as much of the production as they deem monetarily sound. You know, what's conducive, what's in their best interest. There is a threshold at which if they overproduce, then they end up with excess. So let's say we increase the demand by saying that copper is going to be a monetary unit. Well, all they would then in turn do is dial up the production of copper. And then you are going to completely wash out the stock to flow model because you're going to have this influx of supply that's going to completely dwarf the current stock. And the exact same thing just because it's a metal doesn't mean that it necessarily trumps or protects you from any of the primitive points of failure that we've had in seashells and agri beads and anything else, or rhystone, limestone. Copper can suffer the same fate. So in when we discuss monetary metals, it's important to understand that just because they solve some of the technological issues as far as uniformity and production and metallurgy, they don't necessarily solve all the problems. They can still be victim to a stock to flow implosion. And such would be the case with copper. Whereas gold, if they doubled the amount of gold that was mined from one year to the next, it would still be incremental compared to the amount of stock, and it would ultimately be digested by the markets much more easily. It wouldn't disrupt the ability for that gold that people have stored value in for thousands of years to continue to store their value. So stores of value have to beat that problem. It has to be able to appreciate when people demand it as a store of value, but the producers have to be constrained from inflating the supply. And this becomes very parallel to the Bitcoin use case, because no matter how much increased demand there is, and no matter how much increased hash rate gets thrown at it, and this is where the beauty of the difficulty adjustment comes into play, when you really start to understand how the sausage is made on Bitcoin. No matter how much additional attempt at mining Bitcoin exists, the supply is not going to. So Derek, if you're up for it, I can toss it over to you, and you can maybe fill in any of the gaps that I may have left on the monetary metal side of the other parallels to Bitcoin before we pass it off to some of the other guys that have some of the anecdotal historical references to how monetary metals have been used over the years.
Yeah, I think you did an excellent job there. I may have just a couple of points I may add with regard to how gold kind of emerged on the market. Of course, initially, gold was used in small nuggets in jewelry in tribal situation, or maybe not tribal, but at least in village type situations where they at least had access or knowledge of these gold nuggets. And due to the scarcity of these things, they became very treasured and used as a store of value, basically. So as it would be used in dowries and given. Now, of course, over time, the market, as it does, came up with other solutions. And when transacting in a trade with gold, let's say you're buying a cow, it's very nice to have like standard units of weights and measures. And so the goldsmiths, they came out and they started coining basically the gold nuggets, and it gave participants in the economy more knowledge or assurance that they were getting value for value, essentially. And so these goldsmiths, they increased the precision, I would say, of the monetary medium. And it lowered transaction costs in a lot of ways. And these goldsmiths, there was plenty of competition. They would all compete against each other based on the trust. And of course, they would stamp their name or seal on the coin, and it would circulate. And from time to time, if a coin started getting to look like it was worn, they would recast it. So there are free market solutions for maintaining the quality of the money, in essence. But as government does, in its various forms, it tends to try to want to get something for nothing, and one way to do that is by monopolizing the money issuance. And I'm sure there will be plenty of examples later on, but the government's always after, a debauchment or a debasement of the monetary supply so that they can fund their operations. And, gold, I think, was excellent. We had a good period of economic growth during the Belle Epoque. I'm not really sure how you pronounce that exactly, the golden era. And we were largely on a gold standard. silver circulated also to an extent. But that period of sound money, there was, the Renaissance, and there are real social consequences to being on a sound money standard, and I for one am looking forward to seeing that again under a Bitcoin standard. But I guess those are my comments on that, and I'll hand it off.
Thanks, Derek. Well, I think we're going to get into some of the historical pieces now. So I'll kick back to you, Pep, and I can kind of chime in and float as needed. But I know you guys have done a bunch of work, and everybody's really put in a lot of time to understand all the historical applications of this week's lesson. So I appreciate it. I'd rather pass over the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to kind of kick it off with kind of the most ancient forms of coinage. But I'm going to start off with I'm no historian, and I'm doing a large time period very quickly. So obviously I'm missing some very, big moments. But yeah, so I'm going to start off with Egypt, and, roughly 3500 BC was a heavily barley trade or unit of exchange. And then they started to introduce gold as a unit of exchange, but they ran across like a large issue with it. Every time you trade it, you have to, weigh it and have like a true meaning of exchange. So it wasn't often the best unit of exchange. And then, so I'm going to jump it forward, way forward to 500 BC when we saw our first gold coin with, I'm going to butcher this name. So I'm just going to say the Greek king. I'm going to let somebody else say it. Go say it, Michael. Croesus.
Sorry. Yeah, you caught me away from the unmute button. But yeah, I think it was Croesus.
Yeah, there we go. I didn't want to butcher it too bad, but yeah, in around 550 BC, introduced the first gold coin. And kind of the time period that's around like during the early stages of the Silk Road, and a gold coin was already being introduced. And to kind of put that in terms, China, and I'm going to kind of leapfrog it to the Silk Road. So every country was, as it was starting to get civilized, was forming a means of exchange with different countries. And it started off with obviously silk from China, moving to India, and then expanding to Greece and Egypt, bartering different natural resources. But China, for example, experienced, they didn't have a lot of natural gold or silver. They had a ton of bronze and iron, and copper. So their first coin in 210 BC, they introduced the first copper coin. But with this coin, it was a pretty basic flat coin that had a standard weight, but they experienced large scamming and replicas, and so it defaced the value of the coin very quickly. And then leapfrog into the Han Dynasty, they introduced their first it was a copper and iron coin, and it's a familiar coin. It's the coin with the square in the center. It's pretty common, and when you look at ancient monies. But with that coin, they had experience, like what Michael mentioned, a stock to flow problem, because they just kept producing them, and the minerals were so abundant, they realized it just mass inflation very quickly. And other early civilizations, such as India, they didn't have much natural resources when it comes to gold or silver either, so they banked heavily on trade. So that's kind of a segue, but into kind of the Renaissance and Roman era, where Floki will take over. But so China was early 200 BC, and then the first gold coin was in 500 BC. If you want to kind of pick it up with the Roman, or if you want me to touch on the Silk Road aspect.
I believe Obi-Wan, you're covering the the Roman and the Eastern Roman Empire, and I'm going to be picking up after that with the Dark Ages.
Yeah, sorry, I was got hit by the Twitter bug this week, but I'm back. So Roman era, yeah, we can talk about that. So a lot of people know about the Romans because they dominated the world for such a long period of time, sustained period of time. And one of the reasons that they were able to do so was, of course, their military might. As they expanded throughout Europe and the Mediterranean, they used monetary metals. The most common form of monetary metal early on was the denarius, and that was a silver coin, and it had a certain kind of a weight. I think it was 3.9 grams, and that was, largely used throughout the whole Roman Empire up until the time of Julius Caesar, when they switched to what they called the Arius coin, which was made out of gold. It was 8 grams of gold, and then that basically evolved into having a gold coin, the Aris, and then you still had like the denarius, or a lesser form of a coin, being silver. And that is kind of a theme that passed down for many centuries to follow, gold and silver being the most commonly used modern metals. And usually at some point in time, it initially being scaled in weight to moving into more of a uniformed printing or minting process, where the coins were, an exact weight and certain amount of silver in each coin, or pure silver in each coin. And then what happened is, as they continued to expand, as Rome was taking new territories, what they do when an army conquers is how they incentivize their troops to keep fighting, is they give them a bunch of, riches and spoils for winning the war, and they take over an area. So usually what they're doing is diluting the value of the commodities in the region. So, grain and livestock and land are super cheap. And, if you're a good warrior and you save your money, you can kind of, do well, right, as you settle these new lands. Well, that has a negative effect on money, because when you devalue the commodities and allow the troops to buy a lot of money with their denarius or their ariuses, you get this situation where you start to lack productivity. So people are like, stuff's so cheap, I don't have to work. I can just retire, live high on the hog, and I don't need to go, plant that field or chop down that tree or build that boat. And then what that does is, it halts the expansion of the empire and the riches that Rome can then acquire for the emperor and the senators and all the lords of the land, right? So what do? Well, they dilute the money so that, it costs more money or coinage in order to buy, same types of goods, right? This is the first type of form of really kind of experiencing inflation through metallurgy. It happened in a big way, and it happened in multiple different ways. So one of the ways they diluted the coins was clipping the coins. So imagine a coin with the outer side of a quarter, right? It has a rim on it after it's been minted into that circular form. Well, what they started doing was clipping the coins, which diluted obviously the silver content in the coins or the gold content in the coins. And then that took value away as a form of inflation, where they can go mint more coins, right? With, the lesser content. So that was, inflation through actually changing the coinage content. This is very, very fascinating, right? And then eventually it got down to a point where, it was less coins. It would take more coins to exchange denariuses for ariuses, and, continued dilution until which point in time the empire falls, because they can't pay the soldiers to go fight anymore, and they lose control of the local economies in the places that they've conquered. If they don't have governance and they don't have control through monetary policy, they can't keep it through military might. Maybe education and religion are what they fall back on to control the populace. as opposed to money, and eventually the empire falls. So that's kind of the history of the Roman age, which lasted actually quite a long time. If I missed that or I made that too short, feel free to fill in the gaps, anyone who is on the call. But then we have the Byzantium age and the Byzant, and I think that was another person who was talking on that piece.
So I guess I'll pick it up from here, right? So we're going back in time. It is around the late 400s where there is the fall of the Roman Empire, right? So essentially it was the fall of sound money, right? Too much taxation, too much inflation. There was even political manipulation where these politicians would force certain prices, create dependency on the poor, and then once that whole system fell apart, everyone was just sort of screwed, right? Inflation and taxation brought everyone down to zero, essentially. There was no generational wealth. There was no savings to pass on to the family. Like Rome collapsed, right? There was no sound money, and that's when the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages started. And what ended up happening is that all these people, they were afraid, of barbarism and just finding their basic necessities, right? They became dependent on these local lords, what is now called feudalism, right? So the Dark Ages is from the 5th century to the 16th century. And it is amazing how long it took to recover from Rome. I mean, a long, long time, 1,000 years, essentially, right? So from the 5th century, right after the Roman Empire, there was poor, unhealthy, uneducated people all being ruled with ridiculous religious stuff, right? Feudalism. And let me pull up that definition for you guys and what that says. So it's essentially, is what Google says, it's the dominant social system in medieval Europe in which nobility held lands from the crown in exchange for military service, and landowners were in turn tenants of the nobles, while peasants, also known as serfs, were obliged to live on their lord's land, give them homage, labor, share the produce, in exchange for military protection, right? And why did this happen? Why did these territories or feudal territories come into existence after the fall of sound money? Well, it's because these feudal lords were essentially concentrated banks, right? They controlled everything, and it created a huge dependence from the poor in the fallout of the Roman Empire, right? And it wasn't a good system. There was all these pockets of really bad monetary systems, mostly copper, right? Was, as we learned, could be easily inflated and produced, because as we advanced in time, you could create more, manufacture more. Also silver, but it wasn't standardized, so it wasn't really the best, right? So without this sound monetary system and these groups of feudal lords controlling the population in pockets, it became very difficult to trade, right? And these societies became closed off and separated from one another. And it led to, and I think I'm going to butcher this word too, parochialism. Double check me on that, which is defined as a limited or narrow outlook, especially focused on the local area, right? Narrow-mindedness. And the reason why this maintained is because, going back to my first point about being uneducated in religious law and religious, ridiculousness, is that all of the education that was going on at that time wasn't in the common language. It was in the more advanced Latin languages. So it kept the poor stupid and poor. And this is essentially, what led to these feudal states or feudal territories controlled by lords. And here's some interesting facts about that, It was so bad that around 90% of the people, let's say the first 300 years, so from 500 to 800, and probably longer, there was around 90% of the people were peasants, right? That's how bad the downfall of the monetary system made things. They worked hard, they died young, there was barely enough food. Most of them didn't reach past the age of 30. And how it was ruled was by religious oversight, where the king had the divine right, and the king gave the lords power to do what they wanted with their land, which included, their own judicial system. So there's all of these out of sync, out of pocket territories that just were a ton of chaos. It was a mess. And it really depended on your lord at the time, which your territory is either kind of a small, what they call city states, or the better ones, where people were considered to be free, they could have businesses, they could do their own thing, while others, it was just basically slaves, right? These lords controlled everything because they had the money, they had the arms, and they had the divine right. And so now we're at the point of 800, right? And there's three things that are sort of happening at around 800. One is the city-states, the rise of which, one of them I should mention is Charlemagne, which I'll get to. Another one is that the Islamic state that Obi mentioned is going on during this time, and they're kind of separated from all of this feudalism. Just geographically, they're far off to the east, so they have less conflict going on. They're doing their own thing. They kept a lot of the standardized coinage stuff from the Romans that's lasted them a bit longer. But my most important and part that I'm most excited about is, guess who showed up to take advantage of all these stupid, skinny, broke, brainwashed, unorganized people of Europe?
I mean,
Guess who?
They arrived on boats.
Guess who made a bunch of boats, talked to his best friend Ragnar, and got all of his bearded brothers and sisters and raided Europe? The Vikings. We showed up and we wrecked you guys for, I don't know, maybe like 500 years. Yeah, we may have been living in a feudal state a bit longer than you guys have, except we sustained it because death was glorified in Valhalla, and we just died, and we were able to, maintain that. So yeah, we ransacked Europe for a long time. So that was from 800 to, around 1300, the Vikings showed up. So we decimated all of these poorly managed feudal pockets, right? So while the Vikings were doing their thing, there's the more successful territories and pockets, or city-states, right? Charlemagne is a notable one. He is the King of France, 1800, where he promoted education and a balanced monetary system founded on basically founded on silver. And he was smart. He was a smart guy. The French already were smart based off of their economic kind of upbringing, but they were real smart because they made a deal with us Vikings, with the Norse Vikings and the Rus Vikings. They traded with us, and we, the Vikings, took all of the what we raided from the Middle East and gave it to the Charlemagne, to the King of Franks. And what did he do with all that extra silver? He essentially created a stimulus, right? He injected it into his city-state. What happened then? There was inflation. And what did he do after that? He prices to make sure that everyone could keep going, and they reminted their own. Let's see, where's my notes here? Charlemagne. Yeah, they minted their own silver coin as well as implemented all of these anti-counterfeit measures, right? Um, and that was Charlemagne, and an example of a strong city state during the feudalistic times, the father of Europe, so to speak. So there's the Vikings going on, there's Charlemagne going on, and way off to the far east is, the Islamic State, which they've been focusing on education this whole time. And they've been relatively separate from this situation until the Crusade, which is right around 1100, 1000. So now we're at the point of 1200. We're still in the Dark Ages. Things are pretty bad, but we have Francia doing their thing with Charlemagne. The Vikings are just sort of dying off, and here shows up this one guy, a Muslim man, and I hope I'm not getting too far off on this. Let's see here. Averroes, known as the commentator and father of rationalism, where he brought the teachings that they've been working on in those Muslim regions, numeric things, optometry, chemistry. They're basically studying all of the ancient Greek stuff this whole time, while the dumbasses on the West are just fighting amongst each other. And they shared that. This Muslim man shared that. And that's when the European universities started popping up around the 1200s. So the 1200s is like specifically a very important turning point out of the Dark Ages. Dark Ages started in 500, going to 1200 really before we started seeing things turn around. That's 700 years because of a collapse of an economic system to recover. It's ridiculous in my mind to think about. So what happened after we started educating people, right? The windmill was created, spectacles were created, a compass, a spinning wheel, as well as the florin. So this is the pivotal point, right? Where Florence, Italy created a florin. It's a similar coin to Julius Caesar's Averus, I believe, Arius coin, which became kind of the standard, right? Venice followed. And then by the 14th century, there was over 150 European city-states that are minting similar coins. And this started to reinstate economic liberation, right? So we're finding our way out of the feudalistic shittery, basically, because you're starting to reintroduce the standardized coin, the florin. And then what happened, right? After this started taking over, it's the 14th century, the printing press is created, right? And that's where things start going crazy with the Renaissance, which is essentially the rebirth, right, of culture, of art, and education. But one small detail that kind of was another catalyst to the Renaissance was the Black Plague, or the Black Death in 1350, right? So many people died that food and land prices plummeted 30 to 40%, and people started being able to live in abundance again, right? Not only that, but so many people died that they started to question the power of the church, and they started to think about taking their own mortality into their hands, right? And the oversight of religion dictating everybody's life started to slip. So some key things to think about with the Renaissance is that, obviously the printing press was created, right? As opposed back in the day, everything was, parchment in writing. So you're able to then pass information and knowledge at a much, much higher speed. Plus, things weren't all in Latin. They switched it to English. So everybody can get educated, right? And that's really where the Renaissance took off because the church started losing power because more people were getting educated, and science became, at first it was just kind of to prove what God's plan was and try to figure it out, but science is science, right? So the Renaissance, you saw Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Machiavelli, Raphael, right? So that's the 14th century. It took nearly 1,000 years to come back from the economic collapse of Rome and to reinstate a sound monetary system across Europe. Until we discovered America in Columbus, and then a whole new set of trade came into existence, and then that's the end of my story. And now we're at the 16th century, at the end of the Renaissance. I hope that wasn't too long-winded, and you all enjoyed the Dark Ages story.
You crushed it. That was awesome. Lots of Viking love there.
Yeah.
Some common themes from what we're seeing throughout these different eras of human history and what we've seen recorded, right? It's throughout the coinage age, recurring coins, silver and gold seem to come up. There seems to be government power and controlling a large populace and keeping those elites in power through education, religion, and money. Those are the three power tools of the elites to control the direction of humanity throughout history. Sometimes they're used, one is more powerful than the others, or there's a combination of them, but those are definitely recurring themes throughout thousands of years of recorded history. Fascinating. Eventually, we learn, but we learn, unfortunately, very, very slowly, and it takes us a long time to really evolve. Until you get to the point in time where the education starts to grow exponentially, the discovery of science, technology, and you get kind of in this age where we're at now, which is kind of like gearing towards peak civilization age in terms of technological adoption and available commodities on the planet, and production and population needed. We're kind of coming at that point where Mother Earth is starting to suffer, and then we need to work together globally and put aside our petty differences and help protect our home. And that's probably going to be the next 100 years.
Inflation, bad. Very, very, very bad.
Yes. I don't know if Michael's still struggling with his mic. But do we want to open up for questions now that we're, Pepe, now that we're in 8:10 into this thing?
Yeah, no, that absolutely, that's fine with me. For anybody that has any questions, we got somebody that's hopping up right now, but covered a lot of information very quickly and went through a lot of time. So yeah, definitely, if any aspects you want to talk about, feel free to hop up here. We'd love to hear from you.
Could be related to any of those eras we talked about, or it could be, something else.
I don't think Michael's I don't know what's going on with Michael's mic. Sorry about this.
Well, since Aldo is the English and language guy.
Okay, I've heard the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and then obviously the Dark Ages. So that brings us into the 1700s to present day. So how do we see the following, let's say, 10 to 30 years in our history from a monetary perspective? What do you guys think about what's going to be unfolding as during their lifetime?
I had a hard time hearing you there, Kronos. Are you asking, what happens after Renaissance in the Dark Ages?
No. So my mind is that I've heard the Roman Empire rise and fall, the Dark Ages. Okay. So now to present time over the next over our lifetime that's to come, say the next 10 to 40, 50 years. What do you guys see evolving that's going to happen from a monetary perspective?
So his question is, what do we see coming from the next evolution of the next, 30 to 50 years here as we embark on that technological journey that I was just kind of mentioning, where we've grown exponentially in the last, 20, 30 years with, computers. And I think where we're headed is, increasingly more towards that, a little bit more towards a sovereign individual, more towards being able to store value digitally and become a little bit nomadic in some ways, free from some of these constraints that have been created with government. That'd be the way I think I'd like things to see move in that direction. We do need to help our planet, like I said, global warming and, politics and all sorts of things that we need to kind of work towards. Sustainability. If we're going to have prolonged life, we need to really consider, how much of us there are. But you can definitely see what we're doing right now with our technology and with our money. And if we're, using the theme of Bitcoin, right? We're starting to evolve that classical store of value like gold into the digital form. And that enables us to embark on something that is limited by math in terms of valuing mediums of exchange and transferring value through time to pay for those goods. So that's kind of what I see happening over the next 30 to 50 years, as you mentioned. And I'll let other people chime in on that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna mention there was an excellent podcast that's probably ripe for when we get into kind of decentralization discussion. But just going back in history, and what Obi was talking about with technology, what and it was mentioned in this particular podcast was that once the printing press was invented, no individual had to go to their priest to pay for committing whatever sin that they committed. Now they could read the word of quote unquote God right in their own hands. So kind of that decentralization was a direct result of a 30 years war, right? And then I think we're going to see probably something along those lines in the next 30 to 50 years, with kind of the decentralization of the monetary system, right? So I think there's going to be a power struggle where there's going to be these the old guard that wants to keep it centralized because they hold the power, and he who holds the power can make the truth, right? And then there's also kind of the decentralized portion part of it where that I think there's going to be kind of a revolutionary struggle within our kind of lifetime. So I mean, that's my kind of perspective on that, Kronos.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in too. Yeah, I mean, given the topic tonight, which is history, and throughout this space tonight, we've talked about different civilizations and their in their monetary policy, one thing becomes abundantly clear, which is human beings tend to do the same thing over and over again. Civilizations tend to do the same things over and over again. Nothing is new under the sun, and there's a cycle and a season for everything. And so, what do I think is going to happen in the next 30 to 50 years? Kronos, I think that the US will continue to do what every large empire does, which is expand and overspend and ultimately inflate their currency until it's utterly worthless. And ultimately, there's going to be a breaking point. We just happen to live in a very unique time where the technology, for the first time ever, we have a technology in Bitcoin and in crypto that allows at least the citizenry to adopt and opt out of the cycle that's been going on for millennia. So I would see, personally, the way I see it is people. Then you're already seeing it. Smaller nations that are disenfranchised in the on the global stage are moving towards private money. They're moving towards Bitcoin. They're moving towards digital assets. This is no longer a pipe dream. This is taking place right now. So that's what I think is going to happen. And yeah, I think there's going to be growing pains, but I think ultimately the powers that be will continue to inflate and debase because that's all they can do. They painted themselves into a corner, and that's what humans do over and over again. But yet there's going to be a sector of society, which there already is, that recognizes the value and hard assets that are limited, and all of the great traits and characteristics that Bitcoin has, and crypto writ large offers. It's just going to be adopted, and just like any other evolutionary technology, it will win out because people tend to adopt the superior technology. So that's where I see things going ultimately.
There are two items that concern me greatly. One is if nothing has proven but to be true over the past 2 years, we have allowed ourselves to be essentially controlled by essentially a rather simple virus. All right. I mean, I know that a lot of bad things happen, but you look at the amount of control and the amount of freedoms that we were so easily willing to give away. Number one. The other item that I think can upset the apple cart is basically an idiot in any given nation, whether it's the US, Russia, China, India, Korea, is a push button. And that's something that obviously I think is very dangerous with the more power that our collective governments appear to have over the long haul.
I mean, that's a concern. I mean, there's always been concerns about nation states, especially after the nuclear age going rogue and having issues. I mean, you look back to the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I think that the game theory behind Bitcoin, and I think just sheer mass adoption is, I don't know, the tidal wave and exponential growth in technology, I think, will overwhelm all. And short of some cataclysmic event or the world decide, or global leaders deciding to like kill the internet or something like that, I don't see them. I don't know. I don't see that happening. But that's just my personal opinion.
And lastly, I saw an interview a couple of weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. It's probably an older interview with Elon Musk and the adoption of artificial intelligence. He believes that in time, we're going to get to a point where there's probably going to be a standard wage given to most citizens in the world because of the adoption of artificial intelligence. What do you guys think about that?
That would not surprise me. I mean, I follow Kurzweil and the transhumanist movement, and the singularity. So I think that's entirely possible in the future. When you look at the exponential growth of technology and what that actually looks like, that could be a possibility. I don't know, Obi, what do you think? I saw you on mic.
Yeah. I think that it's kind of what I said before in terms of technology moving to the digital. Our jobs will move to digital, how we derive, value. So there's only so much goods and services and commodities and money that exists in the world. So some of this is a zero-sum game, and some of it, it's a new asset class. But so there's going to have to be value that gets transferred from existing investment classes into the digital realm, and that will increase as we're able to use peer-to-peer private money in the digital space and get paid in that type of money. We will also get better at machine learning and neural networks and robotics and artificial intelligence, and those things will start to take over a lot of the jobs in society where a task can be easily replicated with a machine or a computer, that we don't need to have somebody manning that particular task. And we'll move into the more cognitive intense jobs, or maybe there'll just be some people that just want to do art and write and kind of have a little bit of a creative renaissance again. I could see that easily happening as a lot of our basic needs are met through technology and through private money. So yeah, it's going to be a massive shift in value. It's going to be a massive change in the way that we kind of look at governments and look at jobs and meet the basic needs of society, right? We need a way to reduce our waste. We need a way to, make our food supply sustainable. We need a way to advance medicine. We need a way to, increase our travel across space and time, right? There's a whole lot of worthwhile endeavors that we can pour our energy into in the advancement of the human race. And will it all happen in our lifetime? No, but we can start laying the track down now.
I think there's going to be a big educational reform probably within the next 30 years or so, with all of this new technology and new standardizations and AI and all that stuff, that is just going to a complete rewrite. I think we're a good 30 to 40 years from changing our mindset. A lot has happened technology wise that have influenced new generational thinking with each generation. So I think some of the old dogs kind of need to, go on to the next life before we really see a lot of changes. So I'm curious what's going to happen in 20 or 30 years. And if, as far as AI is concerned, if we meet all of the basic needs through AI, will that create a baseline socialism sort of model where everyone has their base enough to survive and then everything else is kind of free opportunity to do more? So kind of a capitalistic ceiling with a socialistic floor, a socialism floor, is kind of what I'm thinking potentially could happen.
I was going to say, a lot of this sounds like it dovetails onto the UBI argument, which is super, to me, initially it seemed counterintuitive because you consistently see the UBI conversation pop up right next to the Bitcoin conversation. And to me, just at the surface, it seemed counterintuitive because it seemed like opposite crowds. And then you come to find that there's a lot of overlap between the two. I don't know anybody else, and this delves into the political, so we typically don't really go that far down the rabbit hole. But without opining, I'll just say there's surprisingly more overlap between the UBI community and the proponents of UBI and the proponents of Bitcoin than maybe seem intuitive from the outside looking in.
The only thing that I would add, to the AI and the UBI discussion is for that, the socialistic floor and capitalistic, ceiling and everything, and this kind of technological utopia to take place. I think it's based on the premise that we're leaving out, or maybe not considering fully human nature, which is something that needs to be considered. And human nature is it's human nature. Humans always seek to dominate and vertically integrate, and regardless of what economic paradigm you adopt and overlay it with. So there are some, there needs to be, like, circle back to Floki's, like, educational, like, overwrite, and maybe there needs to be, or that would have to be addressed, is all I'm saying. The human nature side can't be ignored.
You're right about the human nature side, but I would argue that we're already moving away from the industrial age education system that we all grew up in. And one thing the pandemic accelerated is the advancement of technology with the internet and communications, and the access to high quality educational content that you can find in the greatest library that's ever existed, which is the internet, right? University and going to elementary school and secondary school and all that, like that whole model is already changing. You can find what you're passionate about and become proficient in that area without necessarily having to waste a lot of time learning a bunch of stuff that's not going to be applicable to what you want to do. It's good to have a solid knowledge base, so we're just not just a bunch of bumbling imbeciles, but the education process is already starting to evolve, and I think it will accelerate.
Yeah.
But you're right. Humans are, humans are, you are going to have, there's always the argument of, are humans inherently evil, or is that something learned? When I think that, I wouldn't argue that we're inherently evil. I would argue that if you have everybody's basic needs met, food, water, shelter, energy, you free them up to be able to be productive members of society, because who wants to exist on this planet doing literally absolutely nothing and not helping each other out? We're tribalistic in nature, and there's going to be less desirable jobs, but think about this. Maybe in the future, if we can't put robots and AI to work to collect garbage and solve the refuse problem, maybe the garbage collectors become some of them higher paid jobs. Just kind of rewrite what is a valuable labor that we're going to reward people to doing, because there are basic needs of society that have to be met, and you have to incentivize people to go do them.
Yeah, I think that's where the real paradigm shift kind of came with COVID, because I think that there were a number of, there was just this blatant exposure of inefficiencies in the workforce and in, the corporate world, that there was the pandemic provided a lot of cover to make a lot of drastic changes that never would have been accepted in any other way, between the adoption of technology or the recognition that there's a number of positions that probably don't need to exist and it's just bloat, or some positions that would never been politically palatable to say, well, we're going to eliminate this entire sector because it's at this point frivolous. There's a lot of things that in the past, there's a lot of jobs that don't need to exist anymore technologically, that have continued to limp along because it would have been politically untoward to eliminate them. There's a lot of expenditure that was just for the sake of, corporate bloat. To the flip side of this, I think it also helped shine a light on the under-respected positions that people realize that they can't live without. It wasn't just a white collar or a blue collar renaissance. I don't think that the pendulum swung only one way. I think that there were some basic, let's just call them lower paying jobs, because I wouldn't say that anybody's lower skilled just because they're in a career that maybe doesn't recognize them financially the same as other professions do. But a number of those positions got wiped out and nobody noticed. The service industry got wrecked. And it's not like nobody needs waiters, waitresses, but maybe there was a realization that we don't need 15,000 restaurants on every street corner. And, you probably don't need to run a restaurant with a staff that has, 2 waiters or waitresses per table, and then a busboy behind them, and then a drink runner behind them, and then a host behind them. I think that it helped a lot of people thin out their herd, but it also pointed out the people that you can't live without. Being the people that get things from point A to point B, the truckers for one. Obviously, this helped shine a big light on that. The people that actually produce your food that needs to hit the table. The supply shortages of different grocery products. Not even things that didn't make it because of international trade. And I know that a number of grocery products also come from other countries, but even at a local economy level, things that you couldn't even source locally should you try. I think that this just kind of was a paradigm shift in terms of what is important to a society and where that value is going to be assigned. Derek, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, I just have a few comments kind of around what you were saying, with regard to government subsidies that managed to keep certain industries in place, even though, for example, I think many people probably agree potentially that, we should have seen a lot of banks go out of business in 2008 and probably multiple times prior to then. And yet they just get bailed out. Or farm subsidies, for example, these have been going on and the graft is immense. How many farmers might have actually should have gone out of business? Like we don't really know, because they're propped up by government. And of course, government can only do this because they have a monetary system which allows them to finance these things. If we were under a sound money gold system, with the citizens not depositing their gold into centralized institutions, like if it were really decentralized, government would, first of all, they would not be able to inflate and increase the money supply. And second of all, they would have to go and knock on the doors of their citizenry and collect their taxes. And so in that way, like sound money, and especially our willingness to use sound money, is really more powerful in a lot of ways than the Constitution itself. The Constitution is just words written on a paper that we ask people that we elect to follow. And, we can look around and we can see there's not a lot of that going on right now. But things like Bitcoin, where, the rules are outside of the system, and liquidity, like Bitcoin, let the Bitcoin flow, basically. There's nothing preventing you from transacting, and who's going to stop you? And that kind of system that allows the businessman to engage in rational economic calculation. And rational prices, are exactly what we need right now. I suspect over the next probably decade, there's going to be massive volatility in prices. And it's because we live in a world where the means, or the mechanism in which we measure value, the dollar, in many cases, or other fiat currencies, it's a completely irrational system. And so, that really is the why we need to go back to at least some form of sound money. Of course, I advocate for Bitcoin, But Michael, I guess I'll pass it back off. I just wanted to kind of make that comment.
No, I think it's a great comment because you mean that monetary fuckery is the only reason why the government can afford to buy like 100 times the demand of dairy in a calendar year and then turn it into cheese that gets buried in vaults, and we have to actually have like national ministers of fucking cheese caves. That kind of excess wouldn't exist without monetary fuckery. That's wild.
Yeah, it's the same kind of thing where you hear $100,000 toilet seat or something to that effect, or what was it, a $12,000 hammer? It's like they have essentially zero cost for every marginal increase in dollar production. And so, what's $12,000 to you when you can get it for free?
Yep. Or like
$58,000 was the cost per household for COVID, when the shots that we all probably took only cost $50 to $60. Right? Could that 58,000 per household been better spent? I don't know. They probably only gave what, 6,000 per household of that 58,000. Where'd the rest go?
Well, they put in new carpet on the stairs at the Kennedy Center, didn't you see?
Yeah. Or giving free money out to businesses to hire people, but they didn't increase the wage.
Big box businesses, Obi, right?
Yeah, definitely anything to help the corporations. It goes back to the too big to fail banks or the airlines or the auto companies. It's like, no, you let businesses fail, new businesses will start to fill the gap. Nobody needs to be bailed out if you have sound money principles in a free economy. It sorts
But
itself
Obi,
out.
that's a free market. We can't have that. We have
We can't have a free market.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, heaven forbid that we have, free money and peace in this world.
The only $12,000 hammer I'm aware of is MC, and I'm a proponent for that. So I don't know what you guys are talking about.
Ye old MC Hammer reference. I like it.
Don't touch this.
Next
Too
little
legit
crypto.
to quit this conversation.
Yeah, guys, thanks for the mic. Appreciate it and appreciate the time. Love hearing you guys chat about this. Obi, I had a question for you specifically on that last comment, and I just kind of wanted to hear your opinion. And I totally agree that you let businesses fail and you feel the power vacuum. I do think, though, that there's certain industries that are like very, very specific that are kind of hurting our economy further right now. And I think some of those are like daycares and stuff like that. I know so many folks that, were locked down during COVID. And they just can't find the same resources or can't afford childcare. And people that own daycare specifically can't afford to pay the employees more because then they'll just have to charge the parents more. So I feel like we have these like specific industries that are very painful. And I was just curious on your opinion on that, as I know you're a parent as well, and it's something I talk about with a lot of people.
Stupid Twitter. I'm off mute now.
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Gosh, all right. The app was very laggy. Sorry. So about the price increases of childcare and labor and other industries. Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with farming. Corporate farming drives the price of food up from what, if
Did he cut out for everybody else?
I think
Yeah.
the blockchain ate him.
Good old rug.
the price of food gets driven up because we have a regulatory body that is out there, controlling things, right? We have a government that's subsidizing certain activities that benefit the corporate farmers as opposed to individual farmers, that ruin, businesses and free markets from being able to exist. We have basically a monopoly on pharma and insurance and just about everything. There's only you know, in most cases we have duopolies or triopolies in most industries, and those at the top win because everything's so centralized. And when you allow things to fail and a free market to reign and businesses to compete on their own merits and their products, then you have better prices for consumers. When you have sound monetary principles and you have, you know, you stop printing money and injecting 65% of the money that's ever existed into the economy in 5 years, then then you have price stability of things. And you know, maybe, just maybe, if you tie wages to the increase in production, you make things more affordable for all, and the people's time is valued appropriately. So all of these problems come back essentially to money, is what I'm saying. Money and government control are honestly the banes of of having that existence that we're all striving for.
Yeah, great stuff. I see GoldenEye, you popped up here. Got a question for us, my friend? Or anything to add? You're
I got a
muted.
question. I got a
Go ahead.
question to bring up to the smart panel. What about the 1% and the thoughts about like redistributing the wealth from the 1% back to everyone else? Would that just cause prices to go up because everybody has more and it doesn't even matter? I'm curious what you guys think about that idea.
I'll take that one if you don't mind. So, you know, if we think about money, there, you know, people talk about money circulating in economy, and you know, I was listening to what has government done to our money earlier, and Rothbard makes this point that money doesn't really circulate. You know, it's held at any given moment in the cash balances of individuals, and those money balances they transfer from time to time. And so, like, you know, if there's one large holder and he starts spending down his balance, you know, prices or goods, or I'm sorry, the prices of goods and services will increase. That is essentially a monetary increase, right? Money that was previously not being transferred is being liquidated, and as that new money trickles down or gets spent into the economy, the overall stock increases, and goods and services will get you know, more expensive in gold terms because of that. Michael, do you agree with that, or is that about right?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a closed loop, yeah, I've seen a bunch of the monetary comparisons to like the laws of thermodynamics and that regard. But yeah, I think that in a closed loop system, then yeah, you pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, because I would imagine most of the money is just hoarding, sitting. Most of it's not moving around. So
Yeah, most of the wealth in the 1% is stored in assets, right? And the assets are desirable, and that's what people spend money to acquire them on. But if you were just to, you know, I guess you'd have to sell the assets for, you know, the Fed coupons, and then redistribute the Fed coupons, and then, like Derek and Michael were saying, everything gets more expensive because there's more money injected into the economy, similar to some of the historical references made earlier in our first hour, right? You throw more money in the system, or you price the goods down so much relative to the amount of money. There's a problem each way, but you know, throwing too much money into the system is not good.
I just think the difference there is it's not new money, it's existing money, but just
it's existing assets. Yeah, so I mean, a lot of that money is derived off of shares of companies, right? Or real estate, or collectibles and art. It's not like cold hard cash just sitting in somebody's bank vault like Scrooge McDuck, right? Yeah. I mean, and there's also you'd have the argument of, maybe the best thing you could do is start taking money out of circulation and have deflation.
Yeah, and I may just mention my expectation is that when the Mt. Gox trustees start receiving their Bitcoin um, through that entire process, that there will be at least a proportion of that will get sold for US dollars most likely, or other fiat currencies. So I think that will depress the price. All that Bitcoin as of right now is just sitting there and represents no sell pressure. I think that's a good example of, the existing monetary base, becoming liquid again and depressing the price, basically.
Yeah, definitely so. And I think it's a lot of psychological effect too, and emotions, just like knowing that, all those coins are about to become liquid. It's similar to, I believe it was, I don't remember what quarter, but when BlackRock had their big releasing of keys or for their shares, and it was almost like the market was pressing Bitcoin down just off the fear of how many coins were supposedly going to be added to the market and such.
I think that it's hard though to really gauge the impact that would have, or really, I fear that we don't really have a true like supply and demand price currently on Bitcoin, nor do I know that we will, because of the way that it's been traded as a paper derivative. So I'm curious to see, as things unfold, really what the long-term impact is going to be of the way the derivative products ultimately. I don't know. I guess it's going to take one derived product to truly implode, before there's maybe more reverence for actually having the real asset and not a paper version of it.
Michael, you just kind of mentioned what I was going to say, but I was going to mention that we just need to wait for the fraud to be exposed. So if any of these exchanges are operating on fractional reserves, meanwhile, on other exchanges and on that exchange itself, we encourage people to withdraw their coins to their own wallet. Eventually, if there's any fraud, it will get exposed. And this stuff could be, for psychological reasons, like a systemic event, right? Let's say Coinbase goes down, everyone freaks out. Well, that, psychological freak out can, cause further withdrawals and exacerbate the problem. So this, as a coin investor, regardless of whether it's Bitcoin or not, you should always be withdrawing your assets to your own wallet to avoid that risk.
So that's a topic that's come up a lot over the past couple weeks, so maybe it's time that we kind of touch on that again, because it's been probably a few months since we covered it. But for anybody that has felt the bug to actually get into self-custody, because I know that the large part of our audience is typically pretty CeFi heavy and relies on, particularly the Voyager exchange to custody their coins. But if anybody is getting the bug to at least even diversify a portion of their holdings and self-custody them, it's important to know a few basic key important points in going down that path. So for one, before anybody gets taken by anything stupid out there, do not buy any kind of signing device or hardware wallet on Amazon or from some sort of third party or as part of a giveaway or anything. Pay the extra $10 to not get it on sale and buy it directly from the manufacturer that creates it. Get it shipped from them directly to you, minimizing any potential attack vectors in the supply chain. As far as mechanisms for preserving your anonymity, if you had it shipped to a PO box or to an address that you would be able to get access to it without actually having it shipped to your address, so that you're not on a list of addresses of self-custodied Bitcoiners or and whatever your flavor of choice is, but for something like the ledger hack, where even though they didn't necessarily get access to funds, basically the ledger hack gave people access to people that had ledgers, and then those people continue to get phishing emails, and they're constantly going to get potentially attacked for the rest of the time, because they're known as being in the space. So things that you could do to kind of protect your privacy and good OPSEC practices there. You can buy it with a prepaid debit card from a store that isn't correlated to your name. You can have it shipped to a work address, a PO box, things like that. But make sure that you go back and look through some of our early episodes where we covered just some basic OPSEC stuff. As far as how to self-custody, we don't give financial advice here, but as far as just hardware advice, I would suggest if you are looking to self-custody Bitcoin only, I don't think that you've got a better solution out there than Cold Card. Then you get, to me, the second tier gets into the ledgers and Trezors of the world, and there's always going to be debate as to what those are good at or bad at. Also entertain the idea of spinning up a node and also creating a multi-sig solution for yourself. If you do a multi-sig solution, then you can also kind of go down the rabbit hole of building your own, like a seed signer from a Raspberry Pi Zero, and use that as a solution. I don't think that seed signer is necessarily the best solution for a single sig or really your primary device, but it's good to add an additional signing device for a 2 of 2 or 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 solution for multi-sig. But educate yourself on the tech. Make sure that you understand it before you start using it. Understand, ask as many questions as you can. There are resources in the space. When it comes to privacy best practices in OPSEC, I would defer to Matt Odell and Jameson Lopp and Shinobi. But as far as understanding that your privacy and anonymity, it's the little mistakes that you make in the beginning when you don't understand what you're doing that are then immortalized and can come back to haunt you later on. So make sure that you understand it up front. Go ahead and experiment with it, make mistakes, and then wipe it all and start over again. But it definitely a side of the space that everybody should understand. I don't think anybody should just dedicate themselves to being a CFI junkie, even if you look at it as an investment and not a philosophical adoption of Bitcoin or digital assets. It's still an important part of the sector that everyone should at least have a cursory understanding of. So I would die on that hill that everybody should at least understand self-custody, even if it's not your preference for the majority of your bag. If you're young and you don't care about the risk and you're just in it for the yield, then I can understand all the cases made for why some folks don't. But I can't understand the case for why folks don't even try or learn or educate themselves. There's really no excuse for that.
You heard it here, folks. No excuse.
Yeah, but we're coming up on about 5 minutes to 10. So if anybody has any final comments or anything they want to add, maybe they didn't touch on, go ahead and do that. Then we can start closing it out.
Should we talk about what we have to look forward to next week?
Looks like we got Callan Goldeneye coming back up.
Hey there, sorry
Right
about
on.
last time. I didn't have the mic on. Yeah, just wanted to ask you what you guys think about the theory that crypto is going to have a real reckoning because it's a risk-on asset, and with all this geopolitical tension, risk-on assets are going to suffer badly.
I think if you look at history, if you buy the invasion, you typically fare pretty well. It's usually the peak of the fear and greed side of things and the panic. I'm not terribly concerned about it. To me, I'm not saying that there won't be any short-term volatility given the geopolitical risks, but I personally subscribe to the mindset that if you think that it's going to suffer as a risk-on asset, You probably just need to. I think that view is somewhat myopic and looks at it with the wrong time preference in mind.
That's really interesting. I had another question. Do you guys see any risk? Oh, sorry, this is my daughter. She's not happy. I'm just trying to look after her while I listen to this. Do you guys see any risk associated with the recent crash in Moderna and Pfizer and potential clinical data that's fraudulent? Have you guys heard about that story coming out?
I've seen anecdotes here and there, but not enough to comment. I had seen Borla selling $400 million in shares and canceling his Twitter, and I had seen a lot of pushback about trust the science, but the records are going to be sealed for 75 years, so we'll all be dead by the time we actually see it. But outside of what I assume to be mostly propaganda from both sides in defense of and in criticism of, I'm not well informed enough to speak on it now.
Oh, fantastic. Well, that was all. Thanks, guys. It was a really interesting talk. I really appreciate it. It was really great.
Sure. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah,
Logan, before Callan came up, I saw that you spoke, but my Twitter Spaces has been on the fritz whenever you speak. Were you asking something? Were you asking to go over next week?
Yeah, quick preview what we have to look forward to.
So Obi, we've been building up to a topic that I know is going to be near and dear to your heart. So do you wanna set the stage for where you want to take this next week?
Sure. Yeah. Next week we're going to talk about money history in North America. And so, a lot of that has parallels to what we saw in, Asia and Europe and what we've been talking in Africa up to this point. The transition from goods to metal to one of the things that are near and dear to my heart, which are Fed coupons and the many different forms of which they have been used throughout the last couple hundred years. So that will be the topic of discussion. We might even expand that into fiat currency, broader discussion, and a little bit of history of fiat and how that's fared over history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we'll set the stage by bridging the gap between where we left off tonight with monetary metals and then the introduction of paper money and the different forms that it's taken. From gold-backed paper money to just I don't even know what the hell to call it now. It's backed by the ink that's printed on it.
Monopoly money. Yeah.
Death sticks, maybe, Obi-Wan?
Death sticks. Imperial credits. Republican. I guess they'd be Republican credits, right? In the prequel era, Republican credits.
The Star Wars references, I love it. They never end.
So do you want to?
But I get them, Obi. I get them.
I do want to announce some unfortunate news. Russia did officially invade Ukraine. They just declared war.
All right.
Just some breaking news there.
Yeah, generally speaking, I have this in my Twitter feed, but short of the 2001 tech bubble crash with the beginning of the Afghan war after 9/11, most major conflicts over the recent history follow that Nathan Rothschild quote of, you buy on the sound of cannons and sell on the sound of trumpets. So in other words, war is good for business and investing.
Well, there you have it. Not financial advice.
Hey Pepe, could you shoot me the source on that real quick? I'm kind of scouring right now. I'm looking at BBC and some other stuff, and I'm not seeing it. So
yeah, I just saw Market Redone put it too. That Putin has declared war on Ukraine, so it's out there.
Yeah, I'll have to check. I follow a few like Bloomberg terminal pages that just spit what's coming out of Bloomberg terminal. So I believe it was one of those, but I've seen it a few times. But I can send you something on it.
And keep in mind too, outside of the oil situation going on and the sanctions and what impacts that might have short term for Europe and in trade, the economies of Ukraine and Russia on a global scale are still relatively minor. And the investment dollars that are, risk on in the equities market in those regions are very minimal.
But right now, with Russia and Ukraine going on, I think the eyes are going to probably be turning into China in relation to Taiwan, because if China starts acting up, that will have a significant effect on the world economy.
That would, yeah. China is a very significant portion of the world economy. The United States and China make up, well over 40% of the global economy.
Yeah, I'm looking and I'm seeing this, and it's just so interesting because I look at news and current events from all different angles, like left, center, right, and then in multiple different countries and languages, and it's just interesting to see how the how things are framed. So I'm looking at now. This is like, and it's a Moscow Times article, so take it for what it's worth. But it's citing the AFP, and it's saying that the Kremlin says that Ukraine rebels have asked Russia for help against Kiev since they've been declared independent republics. And then they were showing pictures of actual letters from ostensibly the heads of those republics requesting support. So that's interesting. I would be interested to see if, like, are they talking about like moving into further into Ukraine past Donetsk and Luhansk? Is, I mean, I don't want to get too far afield here. Maybe we can talk about this later, but this is this is just interesting. I like to look at stuff from all different angles and try to arrive at the truth. But yeah, it's something to keep abreast of, and I will be doing that.
It says declared war. It doesn't. No, I can't see anything that says they've invaded.
Yeah, I'm still looking at. Yeah, I think you're right on that. It's conflicting reports. My bad. Jump the gun.
Yeah, I'm looking at Italian news sources right now too, just to kind of balance out some propaganda bias. And over there, they're currently reporting that they've declared war, attack imminent tonight. Kiev anticipating a blitz this evening.
Well, I guess we'll all wake up tomorrow and we'll see what happened or didn't happen, and yeah, it should make for a pretty interesting next week's AMA in terms of the foreign policy segment, at least.
Hey, Aldo, how long did the annexation of Crimea last? Very quick, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I'd have to go back. I mean, it's been a couple
February
years.
20th to March 26th of 2014. 1 month and 6 days. 5 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
I just found it. So I would be surprised if there was prolonged conflict between the two. I don't think. Have you read anything in terms of like treaties of other nations getting involved, or is this going to be like a border thing?
Yeah. So Ukraine signed a like a solidarity agreement with, like, I believe it was like Lithuania and maybe Belgrade. I'd have to look at it. I saw that today. Essentially, it was just like rebuking what like the Russian incursion into the two eastern regions that I mentioned earlier, and it was kind of like a solidarity thing. That's the only thing, aside from obviously the U.S. and European, British, or British and German sanctions that have been placed. That's the only kind of thing that.
Does anybody know what assets we have in theater right now? As in the U.S.
No, I mean I currently haven't looked at any kind of like military assets in the region, but we typically we do. I mean, whenever they go to exercises, we do, we mirror, and this is pretty common, whether it's Russia or North Korea or any of these kind of states that we have these kind of acerbic relationships with. We typically have that presence in the region. So I would assume, basically, to answer your question without knowledge, I would assume we have that.
Yeah, they had Navy in the region, right? And then you have Army in Germany.
Yeah, obviously, we have our Army in Germany, and yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I believe for now it was we're standing on not having U.S. soldiers in Ukraine, but helping fund the battle and supply the battle. But I mean, obviously, that could change very quickly once an invasion begins.
Yeah, I don't see the U.S. Putting like American troops on Ukrainian soil. I don't think that's gonna happen. If anything, it'll just be a proxy war, and that will be executed through funding and supplies and stuff like that. I would assume.
Buy the dip.
Yeah. Hey Pepe, way to kill the mood tonight. So you win.
How to ease you into looking at the chart? How to segue you into it?
It doesn't look any different than it did last night. It's just seesaw.
Yeah.
It's just a seesaw back and forth.
And honestly, all this unrest, it just makes the case for crypto. Like it really does. It makes the case for digital assets and Bitcoin. I mean, this is what we're talking about here, people. Like, irrespective of where you fall and like what your thoughts are on this stuff. This, like, states do this over and over again, and the citizens are the ones that suffer. So that's why this is digital assets are the most important thing.
Yeah, I saw today
Tool.
that like some banks were getting froze up with like hackings and stuff, so people couldn't access bank accounts. Which obviously this is us getting the news. I don't know what's facts these days, but I mean, if that's the case, and I mean, very well possible, that's, imagine not being able to access your funds and the time you would need them most.
Precisely.
But yeah, I think we start wrapping up here. If everybody wants to give a final word, we can start with you, Frankie.
Yeah, well, I second the killing of the mood here. No, but no, this was great. It was great learning about the monetary metals portion, and I really, I can't wait till for next week. Hopefully, there's no doom and gloom, but the onset of war, no matter how far away it is always a kind of a gloomy thing.
Definitely so. But regardless, we'll be here next Wednesday. Can't wait for that conversations. It'll be a lot more good content. But Aldo, do you want to say a final goodbye?
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming out. First of all, I'd like to thank all the people that came out tonight to listen to the panel. I'd also like to thank the panel participants, and I would just say that I'm looking forward to next week. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of good content. And then also, regardless of how this all unfolds or unravels and everything, you know, we're going to get through it, and we're going to get through it as a community. And I think that's the most important thing, to realize that don't let all this negativity get to you. You know, just understand it, observe it, and then understand that you're part of a community and that we are going to get through this together. So that's all I'd like to say. Yeah.
Obi-Wan, go ahead, my friend.
No, I really enjoyed the discussion. It was good storytelling. I enjoyed everybody's segments, and I think Frankie, Mr. Jack Nicholson, and Aldo did really good with current events and news, and very apt tonight, even with the downer end. But no, looking forward to next week, and check out Crypto Airborne and Terra Spaces for recordings.
Great stuff. We appreciate you as always. Killer info, and I know that everybody appreciates it. So thank you as always. But Floki, go ahead, my friend.
Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed my story. It went better in my head when I practiced it, when I executed, but I got some good feedback, so I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. You know, it's important to stay aware of what's going on in the world, right? But it's also just as important not to obsess on the things that we can't control, right? It's important to continue to find joys in your life and actively seek happiness, as well as making moves to improve your life for the better outside of just recreation and joy. So with that, you know, strength and honor, and I look forward to seeing everybody back out on the Twitterverse. I know there's been a lot of good posting lately, so I'm excited to see the fun continue.
Love it. Derek, go ahead, my friend.
Sure, I really enjoyed the discussion tonight, guys. So again, I'm Derek Smith. I'm the organizer of Old City Bitcoiners. We're up in northern Florida. We have a meetup on March 2nd and in Jacksonville Beach. If anyone's around and can make it, we'd love to see you.
Great stuff. Sun Tzu.
I'm just trying to think of how I can incorporate Vikings into North American monetary history. So that's my goal for next week. So we can have Floki speak about Ragnar taking over Jefferson's office or something. I don't know. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming out.
Looking forward to it.
You know, there is an argument that the Vikings settled the New World first. So maybe we can.
It happened. Yep. In like northern Canada. Yep. I was there.
There you go.
First-hand sources, we got it here. But go ahead, Michael.
I just want to thank everybody for coming out, and more so than anything, appreciate our panel. That these guys busted their ass this week to be ready to put this content out, and we know that this new format has not been easy on any of the panelists. So I appreciate everybody that's dedicated their time, and everybody's up here just on a complete volunteer basis. Nobody benefits from being up here in any way, shape, or form. We're not clout chasing. We're not really. We do this because we enjoy giving back to the community in this way, and helping to educate people. And the level of commitment from our panelists to start to deliver the content in the way that we have in this new year has definitely been turned up a notch. So I appreciate everybody putting in the time, and hopefully we can keep bringing it out. You know, we're gonna get pretty caught up to current day here pretty soon, so we're gonna have to dig back into our bag of tricks to keep coming up with content week after week. But I'm looking forward to it. We've been building up to next week's episode for a while now, so it should be a good time.
Love it. And yeah, we appreciate y'all. Like Michael said, check us out next Wednesday. Everybody have a good night, and you know, be safe and be positive out there.
Peace out, everybody. Peace out.